All right, great. Well, hey, listen, so let's talk a little bit. In this podcast, we talk a lot about just the joy of leadership. And so I think a lot of times, frankly, I think leaders can, or the role of leaders can get a bit of a negative perception. There's even a movement afoot, which I think has been heightened during the COVID time, of where people are actually stepping out of their leadership experience, in many cases in their prime. Because I think there was there were a lot of lessons learned during COVID about kind of that work-life balance. Mm-hmm. You've had some remarkable leadership experiences, and so kind of walk me through just a little bit about what are some of your leadership roles that you've had already.
Okay, yeah, thank you for asking. So I'd say the first time I became kind of a official on paper leader would have been at Bank of America. And I led a group of people that did strategy work and business development and channel integration is what I would call it. That role actually took me to another role within the company that I think I led about 20 folks, and 15 of them were probably senior vice presidents, vice presidents. So at a high level, looking at, just some broad national type of strategies and work. And so that was a lot of fulfillment in terms of just the academic part of it. I think beyond that, I've been on pastor search committees, kind of chairing that. I've had the pleasure of chairing the board here at Hebron Christian Academy. I have been on the planning and zoning board. I've had a couple of different opportunities to lead different groups of people, different levels of people, a lot of variety of people.
And I think a leader who has recognized skills like yours, you tend to lead in every corner of your life, and that's, and in my time knowing you, that's certainly true of you. It's like every place you are, you're also leading, which is a blessing and a curse, isn't it?
I was going to say, sometimes you want to kind of, I've had to actually tell myself and be intentional about just step back.
Right.
Don't be the first to speak. Don't do this. Don't do that.
It makes me appreciate anonymity, like when I'm on vacation or whatnot, when you don't have to worry about those things.
That's right.
All right, so a lot of experience in the banking world, but now you've rolled to my favorite fast food place, which is Chick-Fil-A. So tell us a little bit about your leadership roles there at Chick-Fil-A, a cutting-edge organization that's doing some remarkable things. So tell us a little bit about your leadership.
Yeah, so just a total God story on how I went from banking to the quick service restaurant business. But it has been such a blessing. Chick-fil-A is a company like no other. And I think God knew me well enough to know that had I started there, I would have never appreciated it like I do now. Having spent 20 years somewhere else. But from a leadership perspective, so I'm actually an individual contributor on paper. I influence in a lot of different ways. So I'm the liaison to corporate from the field. So all of our franchisee owner operators that are running the restaurants. So I have kind of a market that I actually support them and their teams. So
what's your region?
So my region is actually Southeast.
Whole Southeast?
So no,
wow.
There's no. In fact, just the state of Georgia, there are 5 of us that cover the state of Georgia. So I have 2 Atlanta DMA operator teams. I cover Columbus, Georgia as a DMA, as well as Augusta, Georgia. So
during the whole COVID issue, it was remarkable to see how Chick-fil-A, way ahead of the market. I mean, frankly, they're still ahead, but during COVID, they were glaringly ahead in how the business model was reworked from a sit-down restaurant to being only drive-through. And that success has been hailed from every corner of society. Tell us a little bit about how does a decision like that transpire in an organization as large as yours?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like this is just so basic, but I do think God's hand on, like, I think about so many situations that I've been in as well as others, and there's stories about it in the Bible, right? Like God equips along the journey. So you've got a destination, and you never stay at that destination for long. But I think the pandemic, of course, took everyone by surprise. But along the way, this journey that Chick-fil-A had years and years before is really becoming very, very operationally adept. at the drive-through. And I would say that the business probably chain-wide was north of 50% of our business was done through the drive-through. So a lot of focus on the drive-through. And so God was like equipping us, I think, along the way. One of our core values is, really thinking about the future. And so I think, to pursue what's next. And so I think our leadership is very mindful about innovation, not from just a product perspective or process perspective, but technology. And so what we call IPOS, so the folks that are standing outside taking orders before you get to the box, that was something that they had been rolling out years and years before. It might not have gotten 100% adoption because it's hard. It's hard from a team member experience. It might not always be the thing that they really want to do, especially if it's hot or if it's raining or whatever the case might be. But I do think that we made it extremely attractive to go ahead and hey, let's be on the forefront of this. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and adopt it. We talk a lot about pioneering with our operators. And so they are the pioneers. And a lot of what we do across the chain has been developed and created by them because they're the closest to it and they know what is the best. So I think the pandemic hit and it was okay, we have all the tools. And most of everybody had been already driving toward it and working toward it. And so it was just okay, it's game on. And then during the pandemic, I think that things got even more solidified. I think their operators figured out how do we do it more efficiently, more effectively? How do we, our corporate purpose is to be a positive influence on everyone who comes into contact with Chick-fil-A and to glorify God by being faithful steward of all that he's entrusted in us. And I think that when you think about that, how do you do that in a 10-second, time frame that you have versus someone that might be dining in with you for 45 minutes? So really trying to rethink what hospitality looks like, rethink what the business model needs to be. Curbside has become a huge, huge thing where you use your app, you sit in a parking spot, right, and someone actually brings that food out to you. So innovating and really kind of adjusting as we went.
So I love the fact that you've now mentioned two core values of Chick-fil-A. And so those core values are really driving those kinds of decisions. If there's anything that I really saw during the pandemic, it was that organizations that were that were weak, their weaknesses were magnified. Organizations that were strong, those strengths were magnified, and we really saw those pieces take place. The organization that I'm a part of here with the school, we have thrived during this period. We've really made sure that we are very data driven and made sure to pass on that story to our people. At Chick-fil-A, you guys made some decisions. So as a big part of leadership is being a change agent. So walk us through the changes that took place from going from a dine-in to curbside. Is that a top-down decision? It sounds as though what you're saying is those decisions were really kind of largely being made by the actual owners and operators, and then those decisions were being adopted on the corporate level as well, or at least enhanced on the corporate level. How does that work? Because change is such a big part of leadership, and I think we've been living in a test situation for a couple of years now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about that change process.
Yeah. So I think it's absolutely the most beautiful partnership I've seen. So I've been part of organizations that it is always a top-down approach, and then if folks in the field or people that are closest to it have an idea, then you can certainly. I think there's companies that are more open and others that are not as open. Chick-fil-A, because our business owners, they're true entrepreneurs. If anyone that's listening to this loves the Chick-fil-A sauce, that was actually developed by an operator. So it was not done in our product and menu corporate offices, no. But I think because we have such amazing leaders and entrepreneurs that are running the restaurants, at the end of the day, I think there's so much that comes from them and we adopt it. And now that as we're growing, I think there's a lot of additional due diligence that has to happen. It's more rigorous, right? To just make sure it's scalable as well. So I think it was a lot easier to be a little bit more nimble back when we were a little bit smaller. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of ideas come from operators, and we end up adopting them from an organizational standpoint. And then we do a lot from an organization like enterprise level, and then it cascades down as well. So a couple of items that you mentioned. So in terms of like closing dining rooms, going to drive-through only, that was a corporate decision, and driven by regulations and
Right.
all of CDC, all of that. The fact that you went onto a restaurant parking lot and saw cones, and
Right.
instead of 2 lanes, it became 3 or 4 lanes, turning 3 curbside spots to the whole parking lot is now curbside, and it's numbered with, you might have seen, buckets and sand and all of that. Those were all decisions that our entrepreneurs, the operators, made. So they realized, hey, I can leverage all of these spots that are not being taken up by cars with dine-in customers and make them additional drive-through lanes, becoming more efficient and more effective and being able to get to more guests. So I would say that, I wouldn't give it a percentage, because that would just be something I'm picking out of the air. But there is quite a lot of push and pull, give and take. And I think we really believe in another core value is that we're better together. And so really leveraging the strengths of our entrepreneurial business leaders as well as the folks that are in the corporate office.
We hear in kind of business terminology, this idea of top-down leadership, and that it's looked at as a detractor, as though the alternative is bottom-up leadership, and it doesn't work that way,
That's right.
And we read business. I mean, I read business books sometimes, and I often wonder, I wonder if that person's ever actually been a leader,
Yeah.
And it sounds like there has to be this symbiotic relationship.
Yes.
That a decision is being made on the corporate level, but the implementation and maybe the skill set of the implementation of excellence is happening on that operator level, which I think is beautiful.
It is.
So this points towards one thing that I have always loved about the Chick-Fil-A organization, and frankly, I've been dying to ask you this question, is about training.
Yes.
So it's the only place where you go where every single time I order, a number one, that every single time the person, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And everyone who's been to a Chick-fil-A, that's how does the training take place where that kind of minutia that I think a lot of organizations don't get that in depth in what that process looks like. How does that training look like? How does that transpire to really develop a corporate culture where every employee has a distinct desire to please and to help? How does that take place? What does that training look like?
Yeah, so I'll actually break it down into 2 parts. I think you touched on culture, so corporate culture. So Truett and Dan, Kathy. So I think Dan was really all about the second mile service, and it's biblically based, right? Someone asked you to go 1 mile, go 2, right? And so I think from a corporate perspective, we have hospitality strategies, and that might look like XYZ, and you are going the extra mile. My pleasure, I think, from what I understand, I wasn't with the company at the time, but Truett Kathy said, hey, we want to elevate our level of hospitality and service to our guests. So even that, I think, guests versus customers, right? But at the end of the day, I think it took a while to take hold. It was, to make that shift wasn't easy, and to do it, chain wide wasn't easy, but I think he was relentless and just really wanting everyone to adopt that. In terms of training at the restaurant level, which is really where the beauty is, right? You can have great strategies and it be pretty and you roll it out in a very effective way. At the end of the day, if it's not adopted in the restaurants, you don't get to see it. So I think where the beauty happens is in the restaurants. Our franchisee model is very different from every other franchisee model. Our operators are very involved in their business, and they own that business.
Right.
And so the fact that they're involved, that they're there, they genuinely care about those team members. I think that they are caring about the team members so that the team members then can care for their community and the guests that they're serving. And so that training is really happening at the restaurants. And so I think there's a lot of, on-the-spot coaching. There's certainly equipping along the way. I think there is encouragement. I think there's recognition, all of that. But they're so involved in that day-to-day operation. They're investing in the lives of these people, because that is a lot. I mean, many of the operators I serve and partner with, they look at Chick-fil-A, the restaurant, as a platform to be able to do much bigger things than just sell chicken. And Truett Cathy said it. He said, we are in the people business, and we also sell chicken.
That's great. So the owner-operator model is really what determines that. So that your employees are seeing that being lived out by an owner-operator. Unlike a lot of other restaurants, you can't own 37 Chick-fil-A's.
That's right.
You're going to own a Chick-fil-A, maybe 2, I think, in some situations.
At the most 3.
Most 3. But you're going to be a part of it. And I certainly have been waited on many times by the person who I think must be the owner, and a lot of times they're making their way through the restaurant.
Yes.
And you see that attitude, that mindfulness being embodied. You see it being lived out, which is pretty exciting. It's
beautiful.
It's great to see.
And it goes all the way up to the Cathys.
Right.
So I was absolutely amazed when I joined the company and went down to what we call the support center. We actually don't call it headquarters or corporate or anything like that. It's just easier, like when you're talking with people outside of Chick-fil-A. But I remember going through orientation, someone coming in and they were taking us around and doing a tour. The most humble man I've probably met, and ended up finding out it was one of the Cathy family members. I've traveled with Dan before, and we'll go out on a plane, and as you're walking into a restaurant, he is picking up trash. And if you see people picking up trash outside and just regular plain clothes, it's probably the owner-operator, because they really emulate the leadership, and that was kind of what was role modeled for them. But at the end of the day, they steward this opportunity in such a wonderful way. And when you look at that opportunity as stewardship, like everyone believes, like, I want to leave it better than I found it. And so I think that permeates throughout the culture of Chick-fil-A.
And that spreads, like that's catchy, that you want to be a part of that. So this does point out, maybe what they're most famous for, but maybe also what it can be controversial in our current society, is the idea of being a distinctly Christian organization. I wish that I had only learned this lesson once, but I have driven into Chick-fil-A multiple times on a Sunday, and had to remind myself that they're closed on Sundays, and really had so that idea of a faith-based, of a truly Christian organization, how is that received in a corporate world that is fairly distinctly unchristian? How does that received, and how does that permeate the culture as well in the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I've always said, like, there's not a Christian business, right? Like, a business can't be Christian. Now, the principals, the ones running it, the owners, the workers, they can be faith-based and Christians. And obviously, the Cathy family are very they're little Christs. So, sometimes it's to say that they're very religious. I know religion has different connotations these days. But yeah, they live it out. Just humility, the decision-making process, living for, it's just genuine. They are the real deal. And so I think from a culture perspective, and a business that is owned by, I think one decision they have made certainly is they want to stay private, because they want to be able to make the decisions that they feel align with their faith. One of those things that that is a non-negotiable is obviously being closed on Sundays, and that really started with Truett Cathy and his brother when they opened up their first restaurant. It was 24 hours. It was right across from the Ford plant. Downtown, like I think in that Hapeville area. And they were just tired. Like, I mean, you had, and it was a great business, being across from the Ford plant, you had all shifts, right? So people were coming in to eat at all times of the day. By that seventh day, they were just so tired. That's when they made the decision to close. And then obviously, because that the Cathy families are Christians, Bible believing, Jesus following, they want to allow their folks to be able to go worship on Sundays and want to keep the Sabbath holy. But it started with just physically they were tired and they wanted to have a day of rest. So how does that play out within a world where you don't have, I think there's been a lot of controversy when you go outside of the business practices. It has helped Chick-fil-A. I think I came on right after the whole Huckabee thing.
Right.
But I'd say that there are you tend to find those others that are like-minded, where you can actually partner up with. I think in a business world where they're not like-minded, it's a wonderful opportunity to be a city on a hill.
Right.
And they may not always understand the practices, but I think the reality, I don't think I think it's like our faith. You don't force it down someone's throat.
Right.
And I don't think you charge ahead this is my soapbox. I think it has to be genuine. And so you think about it just morally, right? Who's gonna disagree with hey, we want to be hospitable, we
Right.
want to serve people.
Right.
I mean, I think that's what you lead with.
And they're being hospitable and serving everyone. Right. Everyone.
Inclusion. Yes.
Right. And so I know that they have also made an enormous impact on our country and the world. They have taken their wealth and made sure to start kids camps and a lot of different talk a little bit about how Chick-fil-A has chosen to take their corporate earnings, their wealth, and really impact the lives of people all over our country and our world.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think, so we do have the foundation, and I think the foundation is the kind of the arm by which I think there's a lot of charitable giving. They are very focused on different objectives that is going to fund in terms of what they're going to support. I think the Cathy family is immensely generous with their money as well, all their resources really. So you've got that as well. That's apart from the business. The business, so we don't have a single cash register at 5200 Buffington. And so the business, in terms of corporate, doesn't have any money to really I shouldn't say it that way. What I would say is what you're seeing the generosity of is the foundation as an organization, right. The Cathy family, and then your operators. Mm-hmm. So your owner-operators in the local communities, that is their business. And so they can be as generous as they want. And all of the ones I have had the pleasure of serving are very generous people.
So I love the idea of taking our faith, and this show is distinctly faith-based, taking our faith and really applying it to the real world. And letting that authentic faith speak loudly in relationship to love and caring and accepting, rather than kind of having this legalistic kind of finger wagging culture, right?
Yes.
And I frankly think the world is clamoring for it. In this society, I think we've almost lost the art of being able to disagree and still really like each other. And so there's this mindset where if we disagree over small things or large things, right now, like gender is a really big issue that I'm working on all of the time in school culture, and really understanding what that feels like, but to do so with love and care. That I think that Chick-fil-A embodies. They really live out this mindset of taking your faith, not apologizing for it, truly living it out, which I think the world is also looking for, but doing so in a way that is inclusive, that they're really caring for each and every person. And I frankly think that's something that's really lacking. Chick-fil-A has done a great job of really understanding what that is. Are there certain management principles that you utilize on a daily basis? Are there certain kind of nuggets of learning? You've experienced banking and now Chick-fil-A as well. had an unbelievably successful career. You manage a lot of people. Are there certain nuggets of leadership and management that you have the opportunity to pass on to us today as well?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, I think everyone is looking for authenticism, authentic leadership and faith. And so I have admired the caliber of people I get a chance to work with at Chick-Fil-A. And I think what you guys see on a day-to-day basis is truly what our operator owners are doing in their community. And I think they're caring for their people and I think that inclusiveness becomes easy, right? Like, I think some people might say, well, if you believe X, then why would your practice include Y? And I think when you think about what Jesus said, you love everybody. And if you go back to that corporate purpose again, which is to glorify God by being a faithful steward, but then it's to have a positive influence. Well, having a positive influence to all, that is.
That's right.
So it's not just the ones that believe Jesus or the ones that think exactly like I do, the ones that come to church. So I wanted to kind of touch on that.
But our world tells us that's not possible, and yet
good.
We see it being lived out. And I promise we'll still get to your question. I promise. but one of the pieces that I have the privilege of doing, like really the enormous privilege, is working with young people at their most impressionable times during their lifetime, their middle school and high school years. Brain's not fully developed, we know, until around age 25. My wife might say maybe 52 or 53 for me. I don't know, but
it was definitely 30 plus for me.
but they say brain development takes till the age of 25. So we're here at some of the most impressionable times, and the mantra that I continue to really espouse to our students is this mindset of taking the giftings that God has given you. You're going to take those areas where you're great at, and there's always a career that matches that skill set. But then to not apologize for your faith, take your faith right into that market, so that you can be in full-time ministry and be a corporate executive at Chick-fil-A, or you can be in full-time ministry and you're a physician or you're a teacher, so taking that faith in there unapologetically, but also with love and grace. And love and grace is something we really see. I see it emulated in your life every time I'm around you. I definitely see it through your corporation, and I think our world is really longing for that. So anyway, back to strategies. Give us some nuggets of learning on what you've learned about management.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to talk about leadership and management without talking about self first. Not self-absorbed, self-centered, none of that, but self-awareness. So I think really understanding who you are, what your purpose is, like what God has purposed for me to do, and then how I fit into the bigger picture. I think that gives me a really healthy view of like who I am. So no matter how successful I become, it's a healthy view, right? Because like it doesn't matter how successful, because I'm like a small part of like this grander plan that God has, and I'm just humbled to be able to be used.
That's right.
So I think you have to start there. You have to know, okay, if that is my purpose, then how do I've always kind of said, like, what is the highest and best use of me? And so I kind of say that about everybody. Like for folks that I have led in the past, like what is the highest and best use of this person? Because everyone comes with very various degrees of skills. They come with a very unique perspective, and that's all based on their life experiences and kind of where they are and who they are. So like and different strengths and weaknesses. So like what is the highest and best use, and trying to determine and maximize the potential. But from a leadership perspective, I'd say I love this opportunity, like the nuggets is like collaborating. Like I'm a very collaborative leader. And so just this power of multiple minds versus the one. And so that's the joy for me from a leadership perspective of like, how do I have influence and impact with the role that I've been given today? And I think influence is all about the people that you're leading, because I think you have significant amount of influence. And it's a wonderful opportunity, but it's a great responsibility as well.
That's right.
And so taking that very seriously, and not doing it just on a professional level. So Chick-fil-A has been such a wonderful company because I think they want you to bring your whole self. They care about the person and not just what you bring to the table as an employee. So I think just not professional only, but from a personal perspective as well. So relationships and results, influence with the people, and then it's the impact of like, how can you collectively impact a broader, like if I think about all of the successes I've had or accomplishments I've had, and I've had a lot of opportunities that God has blessed me with, and they've been interesting and fun and great. I sum it all up, put it on this end of the scale, and then think about all of the achievements from leading a group of people, and it far, far like outweighs the other, right? So like that impact, the ability to truly leverage the strengths of different people come together in a unified way, aligned on specific objectives together and problem solving together, and then driving results that way, and then liking each other at the end of it.
That's right.
I think that's the key.
And that's really one of the beautiful parts of leadership. There are stressful components to every job. You have the privilege of working for an organization that is obviously receptive and based on Christian values. I have the blessing of working in an organization where it is a Christian organization. A lot of folks don't have that opportunity to be able to work in that type of environment, and yet they're still an avenue, an agent of change because of that collaborative approach, and that makes to me, that makes the bad days seem still okay.
Yes.
Even when we're going through challenges, we recognize kind of that big picture. So I love that from a corporate entity. All right, let me jump into some personal stuff.
Okay.
UGA grad.
Yes.
And both of your girls are UGA grads,
Yes.
right? And,
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs. And so,
although I have to say, like, this little disclaimer is that I did get my executive MBA at Georgia Tech.
I heard that. It's
go Jackets.
Yeah, that's right.
But go Dogs. Go Jackets.
and so what caused you to have that decision to choose UGA? Tell us a little bit about your background and because I've heard the story before, but I'd love to hear to share that story a little bit here. Your story is super unique. Tell us a little bit of story about kind of what brought you to this area and then why you chose UGA.
Yeah, I'll try to give you a Cliff Notes version. I don't know. Young people may not. Are there still Cliff Notes?
Well, they know what the reference is.
Okay.
It's now. I think now it's a historical reference. I still say Cliff Notes version.
Okay.
Yeah. If they're under 20, they might have to question.
A summary.
That's right.
So my family and I immigrated to the United States when I was 6. And so Philly, and then by way of Philly, Chicago. I won't go into all of the details of what brought us to Georgia, but I remember when my parents came to Georgia, we were looking at different cities. We landed in Dacula, which is what I thought it was, Dacula. It was a single A school. I think I had 80. I came from a school in suburb of Chicago. I think we had like 1,100 in my 9th grade class, freshman class. Came here in Dacula in my sophomore year of high school, and there were like 80 some odd people in my class. So it was quite a shock on all levels. And when my parents bought the house in Dacula, I could have gone to North Gwinnett, I could have gone to Buford, and I could have gone to Dacula. And I remember saying, anywhere but Dacula. And as fate would have it, but it's truly the sovereignty of God, Dacula was the only one that would come pick me and my brother up on a bus. And so Dacula it was. And the first week of school, I remember being asked 2 questions, multiple times. The first one was, do you know Mary and Martha Chan? And I'm like, by the third person, I'm like, who is Mary and Martha Chan? They're like, oh, well, they're these Chinese twin sisters that we went to kindergarten with. Now that we're sophomores in high school now, so that's been a long time. Right. But very non-diverse. And I remember thinking, not even the same country. But
we didn't mention what country you emigrated from.
Oh, yes, Seoul, Korea.
Thank you.
Yes, South Korea. And so I remember letting them know, no, I do not know the Chan sisters. And then the other question, though, I think that is just fascinating that I got asked so often was, will you go to church with me? So Hebron Church had such a huge influence on this community. And to the point where, like, I was really not churched before then. And so it kind of, I thought, oh gosh, is this a cult? I mean, like, are they going to sacrifice me? Like, I just wasn't sure, why is everybody asking me to come to church?
Right.
And so I finally did. And obviously, I mean, that's my salvation story, is having gone to Hebron Church, really hearing the gospel for the first time. I did walk the aisle a couple of times, but my freshman year of college is when I truly came to know the Lord and got saved. And so that whole, you kind of look back and you see God's, fingerprint on everything. Because I just wonder, like, would I have come to know Christ? Would I have been churched? Had I gone to Roswell or somewhere else? Not to say that there's not Christians there, but that influence, I don't think, was there at the school like it was here at Tequila. And then Georgia was just by happen chance. I mean, everyone else was applying to Georgia, so I was like, oh, well, I'll just, and back then it was not nearly
back
as
then
hard.
you could really get in.
You really had to have good grades now, but back then you didn't. So I went to Georgia, and I wanted to cheer there, and so that was kind of my primary goal. Didn't make it my freshman year, and worked that whole next year on some gymnastics and tumbling, and made it my last year. So, like, achieved my dream of doing that. Graduated in 3 years. Came out, I've always been one of those that, like, I'm ready for the next thing.
Right.
Whatever the next thing is, I want to go. So I need to get married. I need to have kids. It was just, and I remember one of my teachers at Tequila, Doc Neese, said to me, Nancy, you need to just enjoy where you are. And that really never took hold. I don't think, like, I didn't give that any serious thought until after I graduated college, had my first child, and I remember thinking, I'm so always speeding, fast forwarding to that next thing. I'm not enjoying the moment.
Right.
And so that's when I really started being intentional about, okay, yes, you can have ambition, and I think it's great to be ambitious, but I think not recognizing the goodness of God and being grateful for what He is blessing you with now, I think is such just a shame, right? So
I think that probably comes with years, right? For that idea of the work-life balance. I have a phrase that I say all the time. I say, "Be where you are," and I think I lived a long time not being where I was. I was at a location, but I'm checking my phone and I'm doing the, So when I'm at work, I'm at work. I work super hard. I work long hours many days, but when I'm at home, I'm home. And people around here will kind of joke a little bit, because if they really, really need to get in touch with me, they're probably calling my wife. Just because I really try to be where I am.
Awesome.
I don't think I've done that well
awesome.
for a long time. And so this idea of being where you are, and that's what you're talking about, that idea of that work-life balance.
Yes.
Yeah. You know a little bit of my story. I immigrated here in '88 from Canada. So we're two immigrants, here. I love that, right? It's the American story. So tell us a little bit have you experienced any challenges immigrating from another country, also being a female? Have you had any challenges in the corporate structure, or has that been an asset?
Yeah, so I think it was an asset when I was in school. I tell the story, and people laugh all the time. When I was younger, I would go the first couple, especially in high school, in college, where they didn't have, like, strict attendance.
Right.
I would go in and sit on the front row for the first, like, week and a half. And it's that, like that, there's that smart Asian right in the front. And then I'd skip, like, for weeks. And then my test results would come and they'd go, okay, she's not so smart after all, but it did help me. I think, from a business perspective, I think challenges, I obviously remember, and this was in downtown Chicago when we actually moved to Chicago. I was in elementary school learning English in a stairwell. Right. So, like, it was probably a 4-story high school. And so when everyone else would go to what they called language arts at the time, they would pull me out of class, and one person and I would learn English.
Right.
And so, I obviously remember getting picked on and made fun of. I kind of look at some pictures of me in kindergarten and actually, I guess, in second grade, and the way my mom dressed me, I probably deserved a lot of that picking. But at the end of the day, I do remember all of that.
Right.
But I grew up kind of predominantly with a lot of Caucasian, like it wasn't a big Asian community where we would go, and certainly here in Tequila, my brother and I were the only Asians in middle school and high school. So all that to say, like, I always kind of just thought of myself as a Caucasian until I would look in the mirror, and then I'd go, oh, I look different. In business, I think more people were surprised about my height than they were that I was Asian. Or maybe they were just being very polite, because I did a lot of business over the phone, because it was a lot of national roles that I had. And so then when we would finally meet, they'd be like, oh, you're so much shorter than I imagined. But then I'm thinking, yeah, you probably didn't think I was Asian either. But anyway, so that's always been kind of comical. I do remember getting coaching pretty early on in my career at Bank of America, because I was one of the only remote leaders in our department. Just didn't want to move. And so I was doing a lot of business by phone, and we weren't doing a lot of the Zoom calls at the time, the video conferencing. And I think certainly being younger, certainly being a female, and I think, maybe being an immigrant, knowing that you have like these really high expectations that you have to achieve for your parents.
Right.
Because my parents always said, we came to America because of you guys. We wanted you to get the education and be successful in America. And so you have this kind of, always this underlying pressure of like, man, I've got to make it for my parents to feel like this was a good, good return on their investment, But I think there was this eagerness, and so the way I would communicate, I think, I spoke very fast, and I spoke very loud, trying to, just trying to get it across. And so I got feedback early on that, it's never great at the moment to get constructive criticism, but it was one of the best advice I got was just, hey, take a deep breath, slow down, and that will come across more confident versus you sounding too eager.
Right.
So I think all of those kind of contributed to, it was probably more difficult than had I been, I don't know, maybe grown up here, looked the same as everybody else. So.
And yet those things also become part of our story.
That's right.
It's amazing for me to see just how I look back in hindsight. And just, you've already mentioned it 3 times on our show right now, the idea of just God's hand that is constantly directing us, and just shaping our path and allowing us to see where we're supposed to go. Was it your intention to go into business early on in life, or were you pursuing something medical or something else? Were you pursuing something else?
Oh, yes. I am Korean, Asian after all. So my parents, when I went to college, told me I could be a lawyer, a doctor, or a pharmacist. I don't know why pharmacist, but that was the third choice. And I, when I got to Georgia, I had decided I wanted to be the next, what was her name now? She was the only Asian TV anchor, married to...
I know exactly who you're talking about, and
I can
missing
see
her
her
name, yeah.
Oh, gosh. Married to Maury Povich or whatever.
Yeah.
Yes. What is her name? But anyway, I wanted to be the next, her, whatever her name was. And they had good journalism school, so that's what I was going to pursue. About one semester in, my parents said, hey, our friends are telling us that you have to really know someone in this industry if you want to be like a TV anchor or reporter. So you need to change your major, and you can be a doctor, a lawyer, or a pharmacist. And so I was like, oh, I don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer. Okay, I guess I'll be a pharmacist. Did that for so went into chemistry and hated it. I'm very right-brained, and hated every minute of it. Did not do well. Remember telling some customers of my parents, and they went to them and said, hey, Nancy's like really miserable. You really probably should let her do something else. And they were like, okay. They came, so, hey, we were told that you didn't like what you're doing. Do you not like what you're doing? Yeah, I don't like it at all. I'm not good at it. And they said, okay, well, all right, you want to be a lawyer or a doctor? So I decided doctor would be more of the same. So I was like, okay, I'll be a lawyer. So I became an English major because I was like, okay, I know.
That was my major. Sure.
Oh, okay, so I did not know that.
Yeah, that was my first degree as well. Yeah.
Okay, everyone always asks me, why English? Right. And it's because I like to read, I like to write. And so I kind of would use that as an excuse of lawyers read and write a lot.
Right.
So I'm going to be an English major. The law school, I heard, did not like to take students straight out of undergrad, that they wanted them to get some life experiences. And so I decided, well, I'll take a year off, go work, and then I'll apply for law school. Planned on going to Georgia, and went with my parents. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but that next week after I graduated, my parents were refinancing their house. Mm-hmm. And so I went with them because I always translated for them in any sort of business dealings. And so I went with them, and their loan officer happened to be, again, like this is mm-hmm. God's hand in all of this, right? So happened to be the VP and second in charge of that particular mortgage banking company. And so after we got done, Bob Slocum said, so what do you do? And I said, well, I just graduated from Georgia. I'm going to take a year off work, go to law school next year. And he said, well, we'd love to offer you a job here.
No kidding.
That was a mortgage company, yes. And so I started in secondary marketing, which is a really amazing place to start. And that's how I ended up being in banking and mortgage banking for 20 some odd years.
So that has become one of the primary themes of this show.
Okay.
The joy of leadership. And it's, working with teenagers, I try to tell them all the time, you don't need to know 17
That's
steps
right.
ahead.
That's right.
Be faithful in your next step. Mm-hmm. And if you're faithful there, be faithful in the next step.
Yes.
And I look at my life. I had never in a million years ever thought I would be doing what I'm doing. And yet God has just orchestrated my path that
yes.
I really live in the center. It's just such a blessing, right? To
yes.
be able to live. I know you do
Amen.
as well. And to live in the center of what God has for you in just each step. And you've mentioned several now anecdotal incidents where it was God's hand. He was directing your path. And that's kind of the beautiful part of what we get to do, right?
Yes.
We have this privilege of being able to be a small little part of what God is doing, being faithful in your management role at Chick-Fil-A, my role in the educational setting, and just being able to be faithful there and to watch God's hand work. It's frankly one of those beautiful things to watch God facilitate what's supposed to take place.
Yes.
And our role is sometimes just to be along for the ride. Mm-hmm. I often say, be smart enough to know you're not smart enough. That if we think we're going to orchestrate everything, yes. We won't. Yeah. But allowing God to do so, and then working super hard to make sure that we're reaching that is what we should be going for.
Well, and I was just going to say, related to that, and this may be some advice for someone that might need it, but I have found that as I look back on my life, if I'm given a lot of choices, I always pick the wrong one. And so early on, I started praying, Lord, just close all the doors mm-hmm. that I'm not supposed to walk through and open the one that I'm supposed to walk through that is like in the center of your will, and just open it wide. And just either take the choice from me, or, so it was just very fervently praying because I didn't want to make the wrong choice.
Right.
Because I had lived outside his will. I knew what that felt like, mm-hmm. and I had lived in his will, and I knew what that felt like, and I wanted to be
and
there.
That's better.
Yes,
that's
so much better. And so so I still pray today. I'm going through something right now, and I'm like, okay, God, it seems like everything leading up to it has been you, mm-hmm. And I feel good about continuing to move forward, but you just close that door shut. Even though it looks like just this amazing opportunity, if it's not the one you want to use me at, then shut it completely.
That's a beautiful way for us to close our show. Just the idea of living in that center is better. Anyone who has any years to them can relate to what it means to not live there, and yet living there is better. And just being faithful in the moment and being faithful for the next step. So, Nancy Easterling, it has been such a privilege to have you on The Joy of Leadership.
Thank you for having me.
It's been wonderful to just do life with you the last couple of years.
Yes,
you are a
likewise.
consummate professional. I've already learned so much from you in my couple of years here, and so it's been a privilege to be able to call you a friend. And thank you so much for joining us on The Joy of Leadership.
Thank you, and likewise.